We are going to spend the next hour exploring poetry and photography as a single canvas. I would like to start by introducing our panelists. Here, furthest to the right, we have Charles Finn. Charles is the former editor of High Desert Journal and author of, tell me if I'm getting feedback. Do I need to hold it closer or further away? I never know. Help is always appreciated. Is it okay? Okay. Author of Wild Delicate Seconds, 29 Wildlife Encounters, and on a Benediction of Wind, which we will be talking about today, which Chatwin just published in August. He spent 3 years in Hiroshima, Japan, teaching English as a foreign language, and later hid out in the woods of British Columbia for about 10 years, where he began his writing career. His essays, poems, and nonfiction have been published in a wide variety of journals, magazines, newspapers, and anthologies across the West and beyond. He is a self-taught woodworker. He is the owner of A Room of One's Own, where he builds custom micro cabins, this is so cool, using reclaimed lumber and materials, as well as Finn Furniture, Charles Finn Furniture, art and sculpture, building furniture and fine art using found objects and wood. He lives in Havre, Montana with his wife, Joyce. And I would also like to introduce Barbara Mickelman, who is the photographer that worked on a Benediction of Wind. And sadly, Barbara had a family emergency and cannot be here with us today. But because we'll be talking about her work, I wanted to share a little bit about Barbara. And take a second to introduce her. Photographer Barbara Mickelman, she started in Hollywood and was one of the first women in film lighting, widely exhibited with work in public and private collections in the US and abroad. Her recent series on photography, her recent series on the aftermath of fires in the West, it's called Fire on Every Mountain, was awarded Best of Photography at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival in California, and was also exhibited in the global exhibition Extraction, Art on the Edge of Abyss, which will be archived at the Nevada Museum of Art. She holds a degree in philosophy from UC Berkeley and lives in Missoula, Montana. And finally, I would like to introduce Rex Wilder. Rex is an internationally recognized poet, his poetry and photographer. His poetry collection, Open Late, which we have right up here, lost my place. Open Late, New and Collected Poems, was published by Chatwin in 2018. His forthcoming title, Wilder Venice, Reflections from a Man on the Edge Who Found Healing in the Nature and Life of the Canals, Boardwalks, and Beaches of Venice, California, will be published this fall. Rex is the former regional director of the Poetry Society of America, where he helped establish Hollywood's popular Act of Poetry reading series. His poetry has appeared in leading magazines such as Poetry, The New Republic, The Nation, and the Yale, Harvard, Antioch, Georgia, and Poetry Ireland reviews. His poems have been featured over the decades in London's Time Literary Supplement, and he lives in Venice, California. Charles and Rex, I will hand you a microphone, and do you mind just going back and forth with it? Anything else I missed about your day-to-day life, stuff you think might be interesting, help folks with this panel? Ooh, perfect, I love it. Okay, so photography and poetry as a single canvas. While preparing for this panel, I went down a lot of internet rabbit holes trying to really wrap my mind around this concept, and I kept arriving at the same term, photo poetry, and its various alternatives. You might hear photo poem, photoetry, photo verse, photo graffiti, there are a lot. And essentially these are all, and jump in if you disagree with any of this, these are all attempts to describe an art form where the photo and the poem are equally important and share and have a symbiotic relationship. But this idea of image and poetry, it's not new. It's been around for a long time. And I actually have some I meant to put that up. So On a Benediction of Wind, this is Charles and Barbara's book that just came out. It's beautiful. Please come take a look. And Wilder Venice, which will be published later this year. So I have some examples here from history. And Charles knows a bit more about this than I do. So there's one from the 15th century, one from the 17th, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Charles, if you want to talk about any of these. I'll go to the next. So these are just examples where poetry and image have been combined and have this symbiotic relationship where one doesn't exist without the other. And then slightly more contemporary. Were these what you wanted to chat about?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
So obviously it's not a new thing to combine image and words, but what photo poetry tries to do, or when it's successful, is that the poems and the image, they're related perhaps obliquely to each other. So the whole idea is not to have them represent exactly one to the next. So there's a relationship, but it takes a little bit of your own, the reader, the viewer, puts their own spin on why those two things are together. I brought up this one about the Mayfly, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to speed kind of through the history of the thing, and then I'm going to read from a selection of the book. And I got some feedback that instead of sort of explaining why Barbara and I chose this image to go with this poem and vice versa, that I should leave it up to you guys to make your own interpretations and see how they work together and why. I did want to read this because this is the first one. It's from somebody, Paul Muldoon and Norman McBeath, if I'm pronouncing that right, from 2009. And from the introduction to their book, which was called Plan B, they write, "Poems and photographs are paired and respond to each other, though one is neither descriptive nor illustrative of the other. Poems and photographs seem to converse with one another. What most photo poetry books aspire to, a symbiosis, a whole which is greater than the sum of their parts." And Muldoon writes, it would not be so much of a stretch then to say this combination of poems and photographs was curated neither by Norman or myself, but by the poems and photographs themselves. So it's a rather unique idea that they didn't decide it, but the poems and the photographs decided they wanted to be together. So the history of Benediction, Barbara and I were and I say this in our introduction, at a long outdoor table in the Bitterroot Valley with a whole bunch of friends, and the host of the party leaned in and he said, "You two should do a book together." And the whole table, I mean, they must have, I don't know how they quite heard him, but everyone said, "Oh, yes, that's a great idea." And it really took us back. One, the enthusiastic response, everyone was like, "Yes, you two should work together." And the second part was, well, why didn't we think of that? Because we feel there is very much a similar aesthetic and a similar way of looking at nature where, I paint or I produce images through words and she produces images through light. But there's a back and forth that we wanted to try and attempt. Sometimes I worked off her photographs, sort of in an ekphrastic way, where I saw an image that I loved it, and it spurred me to write a poem. Much of the time, I would send Barbara poems, and she would find images that she had that she thought worked well with that idea. So we were trying to investigate the same idea using our different art forms and going back and forth. So I think it was, Rilke said he wanted his work to be like an abstract photograph. And that's often what I think we do. This, I forgot about this. This is just one very early example, a very famous one, as a matter of fact, from Facile, which was a gorgeous magazine where they started playing around with image and words and how to combine the two. I think that's in French, so I'm not going to try and read that for you.
Yeah. Well, and kind of this leads me into, why this panel was convened and why we thought this would be an interesting topic is you see this, 1935, but Charles shared a really interesting story with me. Let me go back. I am the marketing director for a book publisher and also manage marketing we have a partner indie bookstore. And thinking about, this photo poem book, I was thinking, well, what section of the bookstore does this belong in? The photography section, the poetry section? And after talking with Charles, it sounds like I'm not the only one that has this question. Because when Charles and Barbara first pitched this idea to the first publisher, it was the first one you reached out to, and they said something along the lines of, well, if your poem needs a photo, then to go along with it, we don't want to have anything to do with that. Sort of missing that this is a combined art form. It's not that the poem needs a photo, it's that these two don't exist without the other in this specific medium. I don't know if you want to share any more about that.
Yeah, I don't want to mention the publisher themselves. Still good friends with them, but I was a little taken aback. I was shocked because I thought this was such a great idea, and it wasn't obviously unique. But they simply wanted nothing to do with it. They said, no, if that photo needs a poem to explain it, or vice versa, no, I don't want to have any part of it. So. We then research very carefully, as any author should, who they're going to pitch their book to, and we narrowed it down to just a couple that we thought we would produce the type of book we wanted, and Chatwin was the first one that bit. And I have to say, very happy with the results. They did a fantastic job. The designer there stuck very much to our vision and what we wanted. And it was it was a long process. There were bumps along the road, as there always are, but they do quality work, as I think you'll see as we display some of these.
Yeah, so this year we're publishing not one, but two books of photography and poetry. And so we thought, let's have a panel and let's talk a little bit more about this. And Rex and I were talking yesterday when we just ruminating on this whole topic, and he brought something up I hadn't thought of before, which was that, because Rex works in music a bit as well, and he was saying, and my background is in music, and how a composer and a lyricist might work together and take a song from a musical, and you have the orchestration, so you have the melody and all that, and then you have the lyrics. But when you think of that song, you don't think of one without the other. You don't think of just the lyrics, and you don't think of just the orchestration. That song from that musical doesn't exist without both of those components, and that the same thing, you can apply the same thing to the single canvas of photography and poetry as a single canvas. And I thought that was just such a unique, interesting way to think about it. So with that, let's dive into... also wanted to mention that we're launching a series, Big Sky Broadsides. So broadsides, if you're familiar with broadsides, we are looking to work with more local authors, poets, and photographers to create similar to this. These are broadsides we've made in the past, combining photography and poetry. So chat with me later, but just wanted to mention that while we were on the topic. And let's dive into On a Benediction of Wind. Well, you will in a minute.
Yeah. We will let Rex
Yeah.
speak. I'll stand up for this. So again, instead of maybe discussing why Barbara and I wanted to pair these images, I'm going to go through these and let you do that yourself. This is On a Benediction of Wind. On a benediction of wind, they watched the cranes leave, and their feelings reached out to each other like the minds of migratory birds communing. Above them, the sky abundant would stop at nothing. He turned to her, and she said, "Jettison everything." Oh, what will be left of us when we leave? Oh, how little time we have. And what will be left of us when we leave? A house on a hill, some wood smoke? Don't laugh, he said. Life is a rare vase carried by a child. As she laughed, tossing his most trusted fears like pennies into the sea. He watched the tide recede, leaving her ankles, her toes. Wash the axle grease of now from your hand, she said. Take hold. Together we shall strike out for the northernmost territories of love. He watched the tide come back in. Like the cranes, he asked? Like the wild geese? Yes. One thing about the book as a whole is first time experimenting with prose poems. And in order to do that, or an idea was that I would use these two characters I invented, a he and a she, they go unnamed throughout the book. And they're not based on anyone that I truly know, but it helped me get away from the first person I. And sometimes they read a little bit like micro fiction, but I view them as prose poems in the vein of Robert Haas, if you're familiar with him. The whole reason I started was that his book Human Wishes, and a poem, I forget the title now, but it launched me into this style of poetry. This is To the Mountain. He arrived quietly in the night, met a fawn along the way, trillium in full bloom, the snow that remained. The mountain top was strong, no flowers. The valley below looked beautiful. Ravens flew away with his regrets. He chewed an alder twig for strength, placed his heart beyond his hands. The commotion in his lower life was leaving. He told the clouds, "It is time." Church was. Church was a shallow river like glass, the night's high-born clouds wrapped around their mountains like lovers. It was the mountains disrobing, taking off their clouds, unashamed. Church was the frostbit meadow, the outstretched arms of the pines incensing the air, the high priest of moose who came to drink with heads submerged, to raise them like fountains. Hand in hand they took communion of the huckleberries collected, while all around them the gospel of birdsong swelled, and the sermon of growing light rang down upon them. God was no angry old man in the sky, this much was obvious. In church, no house built by human hands. Next. Success. It was the time of the hummingbirds, the lilacs, of the sky going nowhere behind the old sawmill. There was a small talk of rain on the metal roof, and an odor of creosote and hot steel rising from the tracks. They would meet in the afternoons, she combing her hair with her fingers, he drawing circles in the dirt with a stick. Already they were old pros, idling, passing time back and forth like a bottle. It was easy to see they would one day marry, grow old together, learn to turn the seconds between lightning and thunder into forever. The first time they met, he asked her to tell him a story, and she pointed to a broken window and made the shape of a heart. It was the very next day that she found him 2 stories up on a homemade ladder, replacing the glass. I will say one thing about this image. This was the image that Barbara and I paired to go with this poem. And at some point, I think it was Annie or Phil, they didn't think this image fit with all the other 40 or so that we had in the book, 40 or 50. And they replaced it with something. And Barbara and I, were trying to go along and not be too picky about things, but we were able to convince them to put this back in, even though it wasn't a landscape photograph, even though it was a little different than everything else. This was the one that we we thought worked best with this poem, which is called Giant Heart. For her birthday, he built her a giant heart, made it out of old car parts, rusted tin cans, barbed wire, and stained glass. He made it 10 feet tall, 8 feet wide, painted it gypsy red. When the day came, he led her to it blindfolded, down the dirt path where the daylilies grew and the skunk cabbage flowered. By then he had added sticks and stones, old bones and French doors opening out. There was a nesting box for bluebirds and a needle for sutures. When he took the blindfold off, she settled against his shoulder, little hammers of joy beating in her breast. I gave it wings, he said, just like the real thing. She walked slowly around it, removing faded strips of wallpaper. When she tugged the starter cord, it chugged to life. It runs on homeopathic doses of hope, he said, pointing to a thimble as he knelt and handed her the keys. This one is for my wife, Joyce. And one of the joys of being a poet is you get to lie. I will admit that I do not do these things. This is my fantasy of what I would do on our anniversary. As a matter of fact, what I do is I give her chocolates, flowers, and a card, just because that's tradition. Each year on the anniversary of our wedding celebration, I do not bring my wife chocolates, flower, or a card. I bring her sand to let run through our fingers, our names tied to the leg of a beautiful bird we let go. I bring dirt from our garden and a single acorn of oak. I bring her my heart on a plate with a small knife and fork. I bring her all my shoes so I may never leave, and throw out all my clothes so she may see me as I am. Lastly, I bring her the apple Eve gave to Adam as we fall into bed, laughing and tangled. And when we come back from that mystery, I bring her a glass of all her tears, collected and saved from the year, which I drink till they're gone. And this will be the last poem. It's 2 pages. It's probably the only list poem that I've written. And the list could go on and on and on, which is why I titled it A Partial List of Things I Would Like to Be. I would like to be a sponge in the rain, wind in a tunnel, the prow of a ship, an atom being smashed. I would like to be air in a lung, cement hardening, bread rising. I would like to be sunlight and electricity and gasoline. I would like to be champagne. I would like to be a match struck, a splinter coming out, a hay barn full of hay, a tractor on the last day of harvest. I would like to be a book being read, a hand held, a beer drunk, a baseball on its way to a home run. I would like to be the sky on a cloudless afternoon. I would like to be a regret let go and a sports car taking a curve, a first kiss, a hug, and a birthday. I would like to be a homegrown tomato, a night out on the town. I would like to be a Christmas tree. I would like to be a couch on Sunday, a paycheck on Friday, good news in the mail. I would like to be a child's first step, a drum being beaten, a bed being made. I would like to be a wedding dress. I would like to be a log on fire, a swimming pool in summer, a toboggan in winter, the moon howled at by wolves. I would like to be gravity and photosynthesis. I would like to be a cure for cancer, AIDS, the common cold, and heartache. I would like to be a favorite color, an old pair of jeans, a hot bath, and a college diploma. I would like to be a dance move. I would like to be a dovetailed joint, a finish line, a path through the woods, a promise kept, a hole dug, a sold-out show, a free parking space, a day off. I would like to be a haircut and a new pair of shoes. I would like to be an afternoon nap, a traffic light turned green, a stereo turned up, a stamp licked, a puddle jumped, a stone skipped, an eraser clapped. I would like to be dessert, congratulations, and a good laugh. Finally, I would like to be a seed of almost any kind, and I would like to be the calm before the storm and the storm.
Before Molly says anything, I just want to respond how I just felt because I was hearing these. Can you hear me, by the way? I don't know. The experience I just had of the way that the photos interplay with the artwork, with the poetry is, I loved these poems so much just now. I just heard everything for the first time, but it felt like it was because the room was decorated with these photos for me. I knew how to feel them. I had a sense of holiness just by looking at the photos and by appreciating them that I might not have gotten. And of course, I get that just being here with Charles. But I know that that's one thing that these two fused do for me. And thank you. That was quite a privilege. So.
Is this on now? Great. So we will move forward and have Rex share a few, and then we'll talk about influences and inspiration and this entire concept. So Rex, you worked on a book where you were the author, you're the poet, and you worked with another photographer called Beauty and the Books. And I wanted to...
You said I wasn't going to read anything off color to the audience. The worst part of this is I did not remember when I was writing the poem, but my mother's name is Judy, and she saw the book and she said, Judy's breast, this is not okay, Rex. But I must have liked the sound of Jude. So I'm going to read these, and by the way, I think everything's been said so beautifully by these two. So if anyone has questions on the way these work or anything, I'd be glad to answer them, because I don't have a lot more philosophy. Okay, so this is called Judy's Breasts. The endless appeal of Jude's breasts, they're set apart like achievement in art. Each breath gives and takes life's form and stakes a claim to my heart and to my baser gratitudes.
And this is from the same book.
Another off-color. I'm too old to be talking about lifting breasts, but okay, I'm sorry.
It's what I picked, sorry.
I was much younger when I wrote this. Childless. He lifts her breasts by invitation to offer a couplet for the guests, who tonight are the moon's lover in the sea, and the beauty marks of couples 100 yards away, already undercover in his mind, spies for a future of her to please.
And then we'll move on to, so these are from Wilder Venice, which is coming out later this year, is still in the design process. So these are likely to change the layout, but wanted to share some of these awesome images with you.
So we're skipping like 30 years. My models, I was just telling Charles and some people, my first job was as a Playboy photographer of all things when I was 20 years old. It's the only way I knew to meet girls. So but when I got older, my models changed, so they became birds. So one thing I wanted to talk about when we look at these is, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Dick Hugo, who's very famous around here. My hero. In fact, I'm traveling to Phillipsburg. I've never been to see where that poem came from. But he wrote a book called Triggering Town. And to me, photographs, especially my own, trigger the writing. And that's what happened in all of these, where I take the photo. This happened to be, it looks very noble and beautiful, but I was just standing there staring at this egret, and I had the focus perfect, the light perfect, and then I went, boom. And he went like that, and that yielded that. So I probably could be arrested for nature abuse. But when I looked at it, it triggered this poem. And the rest, reflection, I'm calling it for now. I walk on my tiptoes through this mystery and only use what passes for wings to balance myself. Will some trouble reach from beneath to tip me over like a lagoon monster? Just try it, is my playful challenge to you. Just try to knock me from this happiness. Also, one thing that it was in the subhead for this book, I had a very serious mental, I don't know what you call it, breakdown. And these photographs were taken, and this was written as a way of healing. And I got very happy, and not wrong happy, and that's where this came from. And I'm still smiling, right? Right? So. My body is a citadel, and at the same time, the village and fields beyond it. I will face myself every day and never flinch. This is one that's in this magazine. It's real pretty. If you guys want to look at it later.
Feel free to check it out. Yeah.
It's. I was telling Molly before that my process is not like many. It's all winging it, which is very good for a book like this. I said it should be called Winging It. This is a perfect example. I took this photo, this picture started with an iPhone 0 picture of an egret. It was horrible, but I liked the way it fit on the page. And so I must have played with it for a year to get it to look like this. And here's what I wrote. Is that you? I imagine I'm in a big, colorful oil painting, and something or someone the artist left out is waving for my attention. Is that you, I repeat, a candidate yet for this canvas of my life? So the photo had nothing to do with this, but it triggered this idea for me.
And this is the last one.
The soul comes with wings attached. My dog, Louie, looks at me as I look back and forth from his old face to the egret, which grows smaller as it rounds the house at the end of the canal. Why don't you fly then? He asks me. We both do, although it seems we're only walking home in the light breeze. So these are some from the new book.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Rex. I wanted to spend a little time, all of us, chatting about the difference between Charles, you worked with a photographer, and the two of you collaborated on this project, and then Rex, you're working on this alone, with yourself. Yeah. However, you did... Yeah. Just, Charles, just what inspired you to want to work with Barbara on this project? You talked about when you first got the idea, but had you done any photo poetry collaboration before?
Yeah, we had known each other for quite a while on the Bitterroot, and I believe we had Montana Quarterly had taken a couple essays that I had done, and we used Barbara's work with that. I wrote something about traveling across the High Line, and she had a whole bunch of photos from the High Line, so it was an easy match for the magazine. There might have been a couple other small things that we collaborated on, but it wasn't until we got the idea for the book. And we talked initially, so we said, oh, let's get together, and what could this look like? If we're going to do a collaboration, what is it going to be? And Barbara kept talking about jazz, how she wanted to be like where we riff off one another, back and forth, a sort of call and response. And we produced a whole series of, and I wish I brought some examples of tintypes, which she can better explain the process of making those, but they looked like old-fashioned photographs, and with my words overlaid over, a blank part of the canvas. And so we tried that and a couple other different versions until we sort of hit upon what we did in the end.
And then Rex, working with a photographer, and then working as the photographer yourself. Which do you prefer?
This is a little strange. I'm also on this trip up here by myself, and I've been telling all my friends that I'm so lonely, I'm all by myself. And they said I should be my own best company. And I'm in a honeymoon suite now by myself. and I don't know if I like it. So I'm my own collaborator, which is a little strange. So I don't know how I feel, except that the advantage is, I think, like I do a lot of singer-songwriting, but mostly the lyric end of it. And I know a lot of songwriters like to do it all because it feels like it represents them. And I think that's what I love about this. It's the call and response, being able to tell the whole story. So I think that's my quick answer.
Yeah, I love that. Can you talk a little bit about your influences? I don't know if you want to, I know we chatted about Gordon Parks a little bit and your history with that. If any of you are familiar with Gordon Parks.
Yeah, are anyone familiar with Gordon Parks and I had this book at home, and I don't know what I can say about it except it was just so beautiful. I don't know. I can even pass it around, but this is a book. It was very interesting because he was a photographer. He was a friend of mine. I didn't mention that he was a friend and a mentor, and he just inspired me. Also, he would tell me his favorite poet was Pablo Neruda, in Extrafagaria in particular. And I just loved the way, similar to my feeling with when I was listening to Charles, I love the way when you see his poems and you see his photos next to each other, it takes you, it puts you in a place you can't escape. And sometimes if I were just reading a poem, because I haven't read your poetry all alone, but I would be traveling here and here and here. And when you have a photo, it puts you in a place, a very comfortable place. And I'll pass it around in case you guys want to see. But that's sort of my feeling about, it's just one person that did it beautifully. And he told the story of his life in these photos and poems.
And didn't you say from a young age you wanted to, I mean, that kind of got you on because Rex worked in marketing for quite a long, you still do.
Yeah.
And that idea of.
I'm not marketing Molly, but I'm
Thank you.
advertising Rex.
Advertising Rex. But that this was your first introduction to that.
I think that what we were talking about is my day job is advertising. And it leads to a lot of what we were talking about today. We were talking about how when I was just starting in my first advertising class about 40 years ago, they taught us that the visual, in the best ads, the visuals and the headlines surprise each other. There's that sense of, whoa, I didn't expect that. And I had always felt that, oh, well, if you show a beautiful car and then you say beautiful car in the headline, well, that's the way to do it. Just reinforce your story. And I think that illuminated, it was a great moment for me because I think what I try to do in all of these pieces, have the visual surprise the headline or the headline, the text, and the text surprise the visual. So that's probably what I was talking about with you.
Yeah.
When I discovered that.
Cool. And then Charles, I wanted to take it back to you. Just any influences you want to talk about from just your experience as an author in general throughout your entire career?
Sure. One interesting note is my degree is in advertising copywriting, which I never, ever went into, thank God. There's a long story about how I fell into that. But some obvious influences, and people sometimes even point them out without knowing it. Quite obvious, Mary Oliver and Rilke are probably two of my favorite poets, and I have. You can see sometimes you can see those influences in what I write. One of my favorite photographers, if you know the book "Let Us Now Praise Famous Men" by James Agee, which I think is probably the very best piece of nonfiction ever written, back in the 30s, 40s maybe. And now I'm forgetting the name of the photographer. Can someone help me? I'm blanking on that.
I can look it up.
Yeah, it's terrible. That's what happens when you start to get older. You forget. At any rate, they went down. They were sent by Esquire to go to the south and do a story on the tenant farmers down there. And what they came back with was a far too honest representation of what life was like. And Esquire just wanted kind of a puff piece. So what they ended up doing was turning this into this book called Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. And you've seen some of these photographs. They're iconic of these dirt poor, literally dirt poor farmers.
Walker Evans.
Walker Evans, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I would encourage you to look up Walker Evans and find his work. He also did some sort of cityscapes. But he has done a series of tools, just hand tools, like a wrench and a pair of pliers and a few other things. And I had forgotten about them, and I was in Vancouver, Canada, and I was going through an art gallery, and quite by accident, I didn't know they were having this Walker Evans exhibit. And I came around the corner, and they had these tool photos, full size. There were at least, 8 by 5 or so. And in the middle of the gallery, I went, holy shit. And everyone turned to look at me. And if I had thought of it, I would have brought those to show you because they're stunning works of photography. So he would be, I guess he's not really an influence, but it's another photographer that you might want to look up, Walker Evans.
Walker Evans.
Thank
Now
you.
we have our homework.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I'm just curious because now we'll do a little bit of we want to have a conversation. Photography and poetry as a single canvas. Be brutally honest, because I know just from marketing that there's a lot of pushback and a lot of folks like, nope, I want a book of just photos, or no, I want a book of just poetry. Fans? Are there fans of this particular style? Okay. But what I'm really curious about are there folks who don't love it, and kind of why? Would anyone be willing to share? Yeah, Rex.
I was thinking, it's before this, but Seamus Heaney is a favorite poet of mine, and I love his poetry. The second one of his countrymen tries to illustrate it so they can have a book with Seamus Heaney, it brings it down to me because I have pure Seamus on a page, and that's all I want. Sometimes it works beautifully, as it has in Charles's book, but there are examples for me where it hasn't worked beautifully.
Yeah.
I guess I would say I love the idea, and I think people probably here are self-selected to like the idea.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard to find people who want to criticize it. Here, I think people need to be, sometimes people need to, personally, I think that visual art and photography and writing, it can be greater than the sum of its parts, but if it was like too, it's like hitting you over the head with how obvious it is, then that would be where I would be, maybe I would just draw the line and say I'd rather have photography. I think really good poetry does stand on its own, but it can still be enhanced by a pairing, and I think visual art really does bring a lot that it can bring new meaning to things.
Yeah.
Show versus tell at another level.
Right, and if we think of it, if we really consider it as a new medium, as something different than, oh, this is a poem, and here's a picture. It's not a picture book. These two things exist together, and that is what we're trying to share with these books. I think about one time someone told me I went to see a play, and all of the props were invisible. And I left the play terrified. It was a scary play. And a friend of mine said, it was so lame. Like, I just didn't, why didn't they have any props or anything? And I thought, well, the way that the actors were interacting with this invisible knife, the knife was like the main prop that they all passed around. And in my mind, I was able to imagine the most terrifying, deadly knife because of the way they were responding to it. And so I got that experience of, oh, this is really, really scary. But I had to let myself go there. And I think I bring this up because I think we're asking a lot of people when we say, okay, here are these words, here's this photo. We want you to look at them as a single canvas. We want you to look at them as one thing. Don't look at this without that. Or interpret, let your experience be the two of these together. So yes, an invisible knife is nothing without the actor who is responding to the invisible knife. And that, as an audience member, was a remarkable experience for me and really, really moving. And so just in my career, it's exciting to be publishing these 2 books this year and hopefully, trying to get audiences interested, just simply because I wouldn't have expected this kind of pushback. And it's exciting to see how successful On a Benediction of Wind has been. It's been out for 1 month, and it's been hugely successful and really, really well received. So, awesome. Yeah.
There's a lot of history of photos or illustrations and words in children's picture books. And I think somebody wants to study how to put that together, and they go together. Studying children's picture books is great.
Is a great, yeah.
Well, most of the time, the illustrator and the writer do not meet. They're totally different, and it's an interpretation of each time.
That's such a good point. My favorite thing in the world was sitting with my kids and reading them those books. And I remember trying to write, and they wouldn't let you do the pictures. And don't you? Are you a writer, a children's book writer? You have to send it to someone, and they assign the illustrator or something. Yeah. But I loved, right. But I loved the way that you're sitting with your child, and they're captured by the visual. And then that also sucks them in. So it would be something good to study for these books.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking about another book we're releasing in a few weeks, and the author and illustrator live on opposite sides of the country, but collaborated for about 2 years, so that the text wasn't simply, Bella rides her bike, and then you just see Bella riding her bike. That there was a relationship, and so then as an audience, the children, any reader gets to see, the takeaway is so much more. It extends beyond, see the joy of Bella, sitting with her bike helmet and exhausted, and the words are Bella rides her bike, and you see a kid that has clearly been riding her bike for hours and hours, and has freckles and rosy cheeks, and so that expands on the story. But those two had to work together to tell that story. Yeah, I love that you brought that up. That's awesome. Anyone else? Any questions? Yeah.
I love the photography, and I'm wondering about art and the difference between, I guess, from a personal standpoint, I'm working on a collaboration with artists, and I'm going to write prose poems to go with art under a theme that we're both invested in under it, and we're doing it as an exhibit to start with, but I'm thinking about it as a possible book. But what's the difference you feel like between photography and art?
I think this is really cool because Rex, as we're talking about the marketing plan for his book, continues to refer to Wilder Venice as an exhibit. He's like, this book, I want this to be an exhibit that you walk in, and the way the words are aligned on the page, and this has to do with how the designers design everything on the page. It's really specific. Like with On a Benediction of Wind, that design may look simple, but the amount of time that someone took, just all of it is so precise, because it's about that experience. And so, that concept of exhibit, I don't know if either of you,
So I wasn't quite what the question quite was.
What it is would you approach art differently than an actual artist tradition in photography in terms of your collaboration? Or would it be the same? Because, the photography is art, too. It's beautiful.
Yeah, people often talk of poems being a snapshot, or they'll speak of a photograph as being lyric. So there is this similar verbiage and wording that we use when we're talking about these very different art forms. I don't know if I'd approach them any differently. Barbara and I, like I said, we spent a lot of time going through different photos and which ones we thought paired best. And what was nice working with Barbara was when we found the one that worked, we were both like, yes, that's the one, that's that. And we often had the prose superimposed over the photo or in a part of the sky. And we tried to do that as much as we could to make it one, like we say, the single canvas. But when I was writing off her work, I didn't view it any differently, if that was what you're trying to say. And so I think the answer is no.
And I agree with Charles.
Oh, do you want me to
In
go back
this
to?
very book, it started as a bad iPhone photo, but I consider it art, and I approached it exactly the same way because it was something visual. So I also would agree.
Well, and a lot of the photographers we've worked with this year have something that's unique about their photography, is the way perhaps their editing process, or they like it when it's overexposed and stuff. So that line is really blurry between, it's art. So the photography, art. I think that there's another panel that's talking about image and poetry. Is that? I need to look, but.
Yeah, Shan Ray has a beautiful book, a big picture book out of all Montana landscapes. And I forget who the photographer is, but I'd go to that panel. Shan's a fantastic writer, and this is a beautiful book. We actually sort of approached him to be on this panel, and I don't think he can make it today for some reason. So I'm pretty sure he's here tomorrow.
Yeah, it's tomorrow at 10 a.m. in this exact room.
What's the title?
The Picture or the 1,000 Words.
Yeah, it's not the title of the book. I forget the book.
Oh, the book title. I can't remember either.
It's on the program. I think if you find the book, you'll really enjoy it.
Awesome. Any other questions, comments?
I just want to say that was awesome. It was the partialist one. It's been a long time since I've found myself welling up with emotion when you're reading that. Well done.
Thank you.
And it's almost a shame that you're a poet. You can't take your prose poetry and that's the stuff of a really, really good novel too. Like the train track one where he fixes broken glass. Just brilliant. Rex, do you have to approach patients differently with your photographs and your writing?
Patients, like mental patients, or patients like?
Mental patients. Eager, you say you exactly, you had it focused, you had everything right.
I was being a little self-deprecating though, but you do have to sit around forever. And you see this, I was trying to impress people with my big lens, but I'm hoping to see a bear. So, because I'm from Los Angeles, I don't think we've ever seen bears there. So, except people in bear suits. But yes, very much, and my kids have been laughing at me because I'll just sit forever and ever waiting. Especially when you finally see the light is beautiful. You just sit, and it never happens most of the time. And probably 80% of these photos were taken in 1 or 2 days when everything came together. But I'd bring the camera, I'd sit and wait. But the ones that were beautiful were as a result of waiting for all the elements to come together.
How's it then work with your writing? Does it come quickly, or do you ponder for a while?
This is, I don't know, but it's so much fun. I think there's this element of play that I've been loving here, where, and I think it came from my love of kids' books too, where I had this visual, what's happening here? What's the story behind it? And so I think that's the feeling, like what's happening there? You could go anywhere with a photo like that. And probably anyone in the room, if they were writing, might go in a different direction. But I like the way these two ended out.
Yeah.
But it's often accidental too.
I want to put a plug in for Dane. He's going to be speaking 5 o'clock on Sunday, and he has a fantastic book that just came out, rave reviews from New York Times Book Review and Wall Street Journal and a whole bunch of places. So look him up. He's a plant. I put him in here to say nice things about me. No, well, Delicate Seconds, my first book, I did a little bit of what he did with photography, where I just went out and sat by a river and waited for something to come by, a muskrat, a fox, a bird, or whatnot. It was a little bit like being a photographer, just waiting for that right shot. And we often joke, my wife, when I was around the house a little bit too much, she would just turn to me and say, "Go watch a bird." Just go. But so the way that first book came about was I put myself in the path of beauty, and oftentimes nothing happened, but often it would, and then takes forever to write these little short poems. I mean, they go through so many different revisions. It's silly. So I'm going to put a plug in I just handed in the manuscript, which I'm co-editing with Kim Stafford. It's all on poetry revision. We solicited 21 poets from across the United States, and they gave us their rough draft from their journal pages with scribbles and marginalia and everything, arrows, crossouts. On the next page, we have their finished final poem. And then we got them to write a 1,000-word essay on how did they get from A to Z.
Cool.
And we're using it mostly as a teaching textbook for graduate students. But I think for the lay reader, it's fascinating because the revision process is what is 90% almost of what I think a lot of poets do. So Naomi Nye is in that, Jimmy Bach is in that, Terry Tempest Williams contributed, quite a number of big names, Shan Ray, Joe Wilkins, C. Marie Firm. There's a lot of people that you may know or have read. So look for that next year.
Awesome. We will.
I think it's called The Art of Revision, 21 Poets on Craft, Process, and Revising.
Yeah, to be edited. Awesome. Well, we are at time. Thank you so much for joining, and have a lovely time at the festival. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys for coming.